All the roads are windy.
Welcome to the show, Charlotte. Can't wait to see what we get into today. Hi.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
Totally. And before we get into it, would you like to set this space?
Yeah, I would really love to do that. Thank you so much for that invitation. And I love that that is even a question for your podcast guest. That's so beautiful. Yeah. So for anyone who is listening, who is in a place where they feel comfortable and safe closing their eyes, I'd invite you to do that. And to begin by just taking a really beautiful, deep, refreshing inhale through the nose and taking a moment to expand in that pause. Notice what's present in that pause before exhaling through the mouth. Ancestors, spirit guides, allies, and relatives. It is us, and we are one vibration, one heartbeat. We thank you for the breath of life that has been breathed into all beings and into ourselves. Spirit keepers of the East, we welcome you. We ask that you teach us vision, clarity, and balance so that we may walk along this path in deep reverence and respect. Spirit keepers of the South, we welcome you. We ask that you teach us compassion for ourselves and for all of our relations, the two-legged, the four-legged, the winged ones, the people of the sea, the tree people, the rock people, the plant people, the insect people, the mycelial beings, the bacteria beings, and the virus beings. Spirit keepers of the West, we welcome you. We ask that you carry in healing medicine for our bodies, our minds, our spirits, our communities, and our environments, so that we may come back together as one heartbeat and one vibration. And spirit keepers of the North, we welcome you. We ask that you share your wisdom so that we may make wise choices, and so that we may transition from this world to the next peacefully and without regrets, always considering the 21 generations that came before us and will come after us in all the vibrations that we are responsible for creating in this place. And Mother Earth, thank you for your radiance, your bounty, and your forgiveness. We ask that you always remind us never to take more than we need and to always give back more than we take. Ashe, Aho, Basi.
Thank you for that. And who are your ancestors? What are your lineages?
So my blood lineages, on my mother's side, I'm of Germanic lineage, and on my father's side, I am of West African lineage by way of present-day Jamaica. So mixed ancestry. And then in my medicine practice, I learned from North American Indigenous traditions like Lakota traditions, and then Amazonian lineages as well, the Shipibo, the Yawanawa, the Masays, to name a few.
Cool, thanks for sharing. And where in the world are you, and who are the people of that land?
I'm on land that was stewarded by the Piscataway and Lumbee tribes, among many others who passed through this space in present-day Baltimore City, Maryland.
That sacred Chesapeake Bay. I grew up on that bay and love that bay so much.
Yes, such bounty in that bay.
Wow, cool. Well, thanks for being here today. And there's so many things that intrigued me when we've been following the Ancestor Project for a while. Then one day I was just like, who is behind this? I was like, oh my goddess, who are these people? I was like so instantly like, yes, because you're going around the world, you know, traveling and just trying out different places of what are the best places to like be naked in nature. And, you know, you're doing really powerful psychedelic ceremony and teaching and integration and holding space for people to integrate their experiences, which is something that's so missed in, I mean, now that psychedelics are gaining such momentum, it seems like there's a lot more awareness around integration, but there's just I was just like, okay, I got to talk to Charlotte. I don't know what, you know, we're going to get into so much, but so I guess let's start with, I think, just a little bit of background and context of how did psychedelics come into your life? And no matter if it like looks one way or another, I'm curious because, you know, we all have our introduction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, my introduction was really through social and celebratory use in like the rave scene and small burner communities on the East Coast. I, in high school, started to smoke cannabis, I guess when I was 14, so like maybe late middle school. And I think that really just opened up my mind so that when other molecules and substances and plants came into my worldview or came, you know, became an offering or accessible to me, that I was down to say yes to that. So, yeah, I started with cannabis. I also was an anthropology nerd since high school. So a lot of my early interest in the shamanic side of medicine practice came from an anthropological perspective and an interest of sort of like academic study. Then, yeah, my first psychedelic was MDMA. I'm pretty sure at a Deontword concert, which is a South African, a semi-problematic South African rap group in more recent years. And then eventually LSD, then mushrooms, then Kambo and Bufo, grandmother ayahuasca. There was some San Pedro in there somewhere. And in July, I'll be going to my first Iboga ceremony.
Wow. So how did you hear the call to step into this medicine as medicine and less as like party rave experience?
I actually stepped away for a while because I started to have a problematic relationship with non-psychedelic substances, namely alcohol and cocaine. And so I sort of like forced myself away from all of that because I really associated psychedelics with my party phase. And then this topic of psychedelic, I would say, I don't know, 5 years ago, started to come into the mainstream like a little bit. And mushrooms became much more accessible. So I started to explore that on my own. And I had always been very comfortable exploring on my own. A lot of my early cannabis experiences were by myself. And so that wasn't like a red flag to me. I don't think it's a red flag necessarily. So I started exploring on my own. And then I was working in a co-working space and someone came in with Kambo marks. And I recognized those. Kambo is a frog medicine that I now serve. And I recognized the marks from seeing a National Geographic special about the Maasai tribe in the Amazon who works with this medicine, Kambo, as a community-wide vaccine. It was first revealed to the medicine person that started to work with Kambo because his community was experiencing a pandemic that he couldn't figure out how to cure. And so he sat with grandmother ayahuasca and she said, go get this, make this call. This frog will come, take this secretion and use it to essentially inoculate and cure this community. And so he did. And it's also used for hunting in a traditional context to really heighten your senses and also to minimize your human scent, and increase stamina so that, hunters could go for longer periods of time tracking game, and not necessarily needing to, eat a lot, hydrate a lot. So I recognized it in that context and asked them. Really, I made a flippant comment because I had just started thinking about the intersection of race and psychedelics and had just read an article that OK Player had put out about Black folks and psychedelics. And so I said something along the lines of, oh, you probably went to a white shaman for this ceremony. And they were like, no, I went to this guy named Dre. And that is who is my Ancestral Project co-founder now. So, so they gave Dre my number, instead of, giving me his number. And I was going to like a pool party and I got a call from this random number. And it was this guy being like, yo, I heard that you're interested in ceremony or in sitting. And I said yes. And at that point, I had felt the call from mushrooms that there was a need to organize community circles, especially for Black women, to start sitting with this medicine. I was the only one in my group of friends who had had these experiences. So when these conversations started to come into the mainstream, I was the go-to person to say, oh, can we go out to the woods and have a hike and try this, or, go to a cabin. And so that was enough for me, naively then, to think, okay, the medicine is calling me, and that's enough for me to start facilitating, which is definitely a topic we could get into, is the one-time medicine experience, and now I'm a facilitator. So I said this to Dre on the phone, and he kind of like read me the elder rights. He was like, that's beautiful. Like, it's good that you've connected with the medicine and you're feeling this call. And be very irresponsible to serve medicine without having had a good amount of your own journeys with one specific medicine, and without having connection to lineage, to elders, to tradition. Like, there has to be a framework of care. And he had already been serving Kambo in Baltimore for like 5 years at that point, had been in his medicine path with grandmother Ayahuasca for 7, 8, whatever. At this point, it's like 13 years. And so he had more of the framework, the context of the ceremonial work and working within lineage. And so, yeah, I went to have my first ceremony. I sat with Kambo and I sat with Bufo in the same day. And we kind of have not stopped hanging out and talking to each other since then. And that was 3 years ago. So it just naturally progressed into what it is now, which is the Ancestral Project.
Well, and I'm not familiar with Bufo. What is that?
5-MeO-DMT. Bufo alvarius. So it comes from, Bufo alvarius is a toad that within its a secretion that it puts out through its glands, that secretion contains 5-MeO-DMT, can be dried and smoked. What I would say, though, is that the conservation of the toad is now at risk because the medicine got so popular. This is the medicine that Mike Tyson will talk about frequently. And he's like, I've done it 17 times. And so people are like, I want to do it 17 times. And so the frog population is being decimated. So, it's really beautiful. It's a medicine that has a synthetic version. And so 5-MeO-DMT is the synthetic of Bufo alvarius. So now folks are sort of leaning more towards, who are able to access, are leaning more towards the synthetic than the toad.
Okay, cool. Thanks for illuminating that. Wow. So this path, I love how it answered the call. And like this, I can imagine, this is all kind of surfacing after years and years, centuries of oppression, of being like, underground. And reemerging now in this colonized world. And so, of course, like coming up, answering the call and then not even knowing that there's like, or not even knowing how important that framework of care and having that lineage and training and facilitating is. So where did you find that framework and that training, and how did you connect in with the lineages? Who are they? I guess, who are your teachers too? I would love to just like hear kind of a little bit more of that context and the journey into stepping away from just taking some women in the woods to like ceremony. Which, not saying woman in the woods. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like my good friends, and we would it was very much framed as like, we're going to do a thing together, not framed as I'm going to facilitate a journey for you. So I really apprenticed during the pandemic, was like what I spent my entire time doing. So Dre and I met the summer before the pandemic. And I started to sit in my own ceremonies then, to do my own cleaning of myself and looking at my own shit before thinking that I was in a place to support anyone else. And so it really just evolved as me supporting in ceremony. So like whether that was cleaning out puke buckets or whatever, setting up the space, building the altar, learning to clean the space out with different smudges and like what those different smokes are used for. And, but not really like class-based. It's like, okay, we've now done this 10 times. You've watched me do this 10 times. So now like, one, the questions can be more pointed, and also there can be less questions. It's just a different form of learning. So yeah, I didn't like touch another person or serve. I don't serve on my own. This is another interesting thing that we could talk about, is that like when you look at traditional context, there's a lot of people out here who are like solo facilitators. And when you look at a traditional context, like it's almost never a solo situation. Like you always have a support team of folks that are moving in the space, supporting the container, holding the container. So yeah, I just sat in ceremony. We were still able to do one-on-ones with Kambo. We took a hiatus during the beginning of the pandemic, and then when we got to a place of where we felt comfortable doing it, we opened the space back up to one-on-ones. And then slowly started to do like smaller and smaller groups. And over the course of 18 months, I probably supported 100 or 150 people in ceremony. So that was like my primary learning. Now I'm also in a 3-year PhD tracked program for transpersonal psychology and psychedelic medicine, because the reality is we are modern humans who live in unintegrated societies. And so it is important to have a grasp and an understanding on some of the frameworks that we move in more frequently, and the language around mental health that people are familiar with. And then looking to ancestral practice as a form of harm reduction for how you build the set and setting that the medicine session actually takes place in. So it's a continuous learning process. But when I met Dre, he was already not functioning as many folks out here are. I had to do an intake form, and then I had to have a in-depth preparation conversation with him that was really like the beginning of this ceremony. And we move through that exact same process now. We have an intake process that we eventually formalized more than how he had it. So I feel like, we're also a pretty generationally spanned organization. I'm 30, he's 53. So I had background in like the tech space and marketing. So I was able to come in and say, you have this beautiful process that you're taking people through, but like you're taking notes in the notes app on your phone. So like, how do we, and you're scheduling people yourself and like trying to do that in between a job, you know? So how do we, it really, the Ancestor Project started as how do I make this process easier for you to be able to help more people and support more people in ceremony. So that was the beginning. And then as we got deeper into it, now our intake process is like a minimum 90-minute well-being self-assessment that we require everyone to do. And then you do a minimum 60-minute preparation session where we talk about daily rituals, your intention, your communal relations, your relationship to the environment, like all of that. And then you have your medicine session, and then we do integration afterwards to see like, okay, you had these insights, greater clarity, greater calm, like, and now how do you use that to move into the next stage of your life? So my teachers are the person I get to work with every day. And now we're like in this very symbiotic, like teacher and student, student and teacher, like constantly moving in and out of those roles with each other. And then within my program, and then I have like, I feel like there's a lineage of like academic knowledge that I pull from as well, from cultural knowledge that I pull from as well. So it's like, I try to take a very broad approach to who my teachers are. I'm not really one of these people who's like my shaman. There's a lot of people in this space who are like my teacher, my taita, my shaman. I don't really get that. I wasn't encouraged to see it in that way or to use that language around my learning process. And so I don't. I have people that I have deep admiration for in the path. And the reality is that my greatest teachers are the medicines and my inner teacher.
Thank you. Yeah. And I love that you're like, hey, you don't have to be scheduling people yourself. Like, that's such a gift too, to be able to bring that and help him bring forward more of this medicine and weave this together in this symbiotic relationship. Yeah. It's cool. So you said you're still at work, you know, you two work together, and it's not that you're like guiding people in ceremony on your own. It's more like this, mini community sort of essence, sounds like, that you've got going on. Like mini in terms of like maybe you're guiding one person, so it's 3 people, but then expanding outwards into how I see you bringing together like integration calls and stuff for people who feel that need. Can we talk about how you're helping create more of this space, create space that is accessible to Black women and BIPOC folks in the psychedelic healing world? And what were you seeing that, what gaps were you seeing that, you were able to step that into and bring this?
Yeah, totally. So when Dre and I met, and I shared this thought around circles for Black women, his initial response was that ceremony is not a place in which we create more division. And it was really interesting. I was like, don't love your answer. I don't love it. But again, I would say I'm a generally very open person. Like, I'm very interested in nuance. I'm very interested in dissenting opinions. So I was like, I was captain of the debate team. I was like, I can convince him. It's fine. We'll just convince him. So I invited him to a conference in DC that was put on by the People of Color Psychedelic Collective. That was about people of color in psychedelics. And we spent the day in a room of other Black and brown folks who had the same experiences that we or that we did have, which was 9 times out of 10 being the only or one of very few non-white people in ceremonial spaces, in festival spaces, in rave spaces, like all these things that were seen as very much quote unquote like crazy white people shit. But that we existed, like we were doing this medicine work and we were looking for each other. And I distinctly remember during like a lunch break or something of the conference that Dre got down on the ground on his knees and he was like, you were right, like we need this, I need this. And it's funny because the place where that happened, I just went to a cacao and sound bath there the other night, and like that piece of the story came back to me, that memory, which was hilarious. So we went to this conference, we stepped into this space, and I think it opened for, I was very, I would say generationally, we were like very in this conversation. This is like, you know, I was in college when people were starting to get woke and use that as like the go-to term. So for me, it was very obvious. And for him, I think it was something that he had to really shut down in himself, like the feelings around being the only one as a means of survival and a way of being able to access the medicine. And this space and our growing friendship made the space for both of us to say, like, actually, this has not been awesome. Like, we're so grateful that we have a relationship with the medicine and that we were connected to the medicine, mainly in predominantly white spaces. And also, we could do something different. So from there, we just started to think about doing things locally here in Baltimore, like having integration circles and educational events. We see education as like one of the big barriers and reasons why there's still so much stigma in BIPOC communities around these medicines, despite the fact that many of these medicines and traditions that are becoming increasingly popular in the mainstream originate in our communities. And so, yeah, we saw these as like the two pillars, the three pillars of providing folks with education, providing them with a safe and legal ceremonial space, and providing them with free integration, free community integration options, and one-on-one integration options. And, you know, the reality is that to this day, our ceremonies are open to all peoples. I would say one of the challenging truths about working towards collective liberation is that you are working towards collective liberation for all peoples, and that includes all peoples. And one of the things that we really try to illuminate in conversations around ancestry as well and decolonization is like whiteness is also a myth. So how do we, and not necessarily always we as in the Ancestor Project, but in general as a collective, like how do we support white folks in coming back to and being interested in their lineages, their ancestral traditions as a means of combating widespread appropriation and continued colonization and socialization.
Cool. So I'd love to hear you unpack what you mean by whiteness is a myth, if you're so willing.
Yeah. So I'll tread carefully into this conversation because what I want to state very clearly is that racism is very real, oppression is very real, structural oppression and systemic oppression are very, very real. However, these systems are built off of things that are completely constructs, like fully made up concepts, including the big two, I would say, are race and gender. The other big one is time, but that's more like a woo-woo conversation. But yeah, but the two big ones, you know, that are very prevalent in this conversation around decolonization are race and gender. So colonization was practiced first in Europe, right? So if we go like way back to hunter-gatherer times and then slowly starting to move into sedentary, like non-nomadic communities, those communities were based on animist traditions. Like there was ritual that maintained right relationship with the earth, with the elements, with the gods. There were many gods. Right, this is like pre-Abrahamic tradition takeover. I like to think about, because it's also part of my lineage, right? Like thinking about the Vikings. I feel like that's like the popular go-to one these days, which that's fine. People want to like latch very closely to Nordic tradition because there's information. Like I feel like people try to grasp onto what can be known. So there is a good amount of information about Nordic traditions, polytheistic, animist, all things are living, all elements are beings, worked with entheogens, worked with mushrooms, worked with smoke and burning and smudging of things, right? So when you start to like track this through the world, through Europe, we start to see these connections of spirituality, these similarities, and also this greater understanding of what it is to be indigenous to a land. So that's another conversation. Also, frequently in the American context, we say things like BIPOC, and when we say indigenous, that calls to reference like indigenous to this land, Native American. But like there were folks who were native to what is present day Europe. Once colonization successfully swept away the pagan traditions of Europe and replaced them with Christianity, and then obviously like Islam as you move over closer to the Middle East, and Judaism, then in order to like export this concept, whiteness needed to be a united front in comparison to blackness, right? And so when I talk about the myth of whiteness, it's like this myth that all white people are the same. Like whiteness is not a monolith. I'm sure I could have gotten there faster, but I liked my weaving through it.
I love it. I love it. Keep going.
Whiteness is not a monolith. Like you're not white just as much as I'm not black, right? Like I'm Jamaican. I'm of the diaspora. And you have your, you asked me in the beginning, what are my lineages? I'm a biracial Black woman. My mother is of Germanic lineage. I don't say she's not white. She's not European. It's of Germanic lineage. It's coming from the Germanic people, the Saxon people. So I think it's important that we start to get into, I mean, we're so into like identifiers and separation these days. Like, why don't we get into where we're coming from as like a real way of understanding these different lines of history and ritual and practice and relationship with the earth. So that's the myth of whiteness.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like I should call you Professor. Thank you, Professor. Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. And, you know, I think that's something that for one, a lot of people aren't used to thinking about race and that it's not a monolith, including whiteness, and like it's a whole bag to unpack and thing to learn for people to learn about. And I encourage people to learn about it. I mean, it's cool because then you do start connecting with your actual lineages, and then you're like, okay, and then you don't take it personally that you carry the internal, as you were speaking before we recorded, internalized colonization. It's not like because of your skin color, it's like because of the systems we're in, and you know. So I'd love to go there too if you're into that of what you were mentioned before we started talking about social media and it being like this echo chamber of policing. And I know this can be like, whew, I know people are feeling it because I know people are feeling it. So I don't know, what you want to get into that and just what do you mean and unpack that for us.
Yeah, I went on this tangent the other day in my stories because I'm getting ready to go into the jungle in Ecuador and sit with grandmother medicine with Yahe for 7 nights. So I'm like really been keeping a close eye on my behaviors, on my triggers, on like my intentions, all of that. And I noticed I was getting super annoyed the other day on Instagram because I just kept like, you scroll and just so frequently it's like, you shouldn't be saying this thing. This person shouldn't call themselves that. This and then often it's very shrouded in education as well. Like, I'm trying to inform you about why you can't use this thing and you can't go here and say this and da, da, da. And, you know, it's a double-edged sword. I'm really grateful for how careful we are becoming about language, how aware we are becoming of how we impact other people, how our words are our power and our poison, and we do have the capacity to cause harm and cause trauma. So I'm grateful for that aspect of it. And I feel like we are all really, really accustomed to existing in a very punitive culture or a very punitive society it's focused on punishment and as embarrassment and judgment and shame as a form of learning, which just doesn't work. I don't think you'd ever talk to any, like, I don't know, elementary school teacher or early childhood development counselor who says that any of that is effective. And I really see this constant policing of each other as an extension of the police state. Like, it is a form of us internalizing living in a punitive society where we're just replicating that policing in our communities. And really what it brought me to was this question to ask of self, of like, what are you policing within yourself? Because that's really where this conversation for me around the decolonization practice starts, is like, you have to decolonize yourself, because when you don't, you're just projecting that hurt into the world. Like, if you don't clean up and work to reduce the pain and the suffering and the hurt that you feel internally, then it just continues to exist in the collective as well. So I'm really interested in, how we move into conversations around restorative justice and how we communicate with greater patience and compassion and respect for each other, as I just have seen it be much more impactful than this like shaming and judging that we seem to be doing across the board.
I feel like this ties back into healing now, and like how does psychedelic healing and also the integration that comes after a psychedelic experience play into this moving away from a punitive culture inside and out?
Oh, 1,000%. Such a good question. For me, in my experience and what I've witnessed in others, is that, this ties really well into this idea of constructs, right? Like, it starts to help you in questioning those constructs and in wondering, like, do they even serve me? And how am I replicating them? How am I participating in this system of oppression? How am I participating in it internally? Because I feel like the other piece, and I was just talking about this with someone, for me, one of the most impactful awarenesses of my journey was when I realized that I had the capacity to cause harm to others. So when I came out of the victim mindset and recognized what my role is in perpetuating these systems. There's this really good book by Paulo Freire, who is a Brazilian pedagogist, and it's called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And he talks about, what is the exact phrasing? It's a lateral oppression that we frequently, as a means of maintaining or gaining social power, value, whatever it is, some type of, status on the hierarchy, that we oppress each other. Like, we don't need the system as much anymore because we've internalized it so much that we're just oppressing each other. And psychedelics help us take a step back from that and see what our role is in all of that, so that in the integration process, we can begin new habits, new narratives, new behaviors that begin to call in the world that we actually want to see. I'll frequently say, like, I didn't choose structural racism and credit scores, but I do choose how I respond to those things every day. And I can choose to respond in a way that brings greater ease into my life, that focuses on love and gentleness, or I can exist in a state of constant suffering. And I feel like one of the other, hard realizations that psychedelics, sacred earth medicines really help us to ease is that at a certain point in life, outside again of these systems and structures, like, we are pretty responsible for replicating our own trauma. And we have to start to take accountability for that, because as we're replicating trauma in our own lives, then we're replicating it externally as well, and it's rippling through the collective. So when we talk about, like those constructs around race or gender, even your name, like your family lineage, your historical context, all of the things that come with that. Like, we're born into this world, you get a gender, you get a name, you get a race, and then you get all of the shit that comes with that already. Before you've even taken like your third breath of life, you're already a Black woman, and that means that you're going to be strong, and that means you're going to persevere, and da-da-da. Like, I want to be soft. I would like luxury. I like those things. I don't really want to be hard. My ancestors did a lot of that. Most of our ancestors did a lot of that. And I feel like they didn't do all of that so that I continue to suffer. So, really like stepping into this place of deciding what it is that how you want your life to be constructed, what constructs are important to you. The place that I see a lot of people in the psychedelic space get caught up, or in the spiritual space get caught up in this conversation, is skipping to, but race is a construct, so it doesn't exist, so we just don't talk about it, and if we don't talk about it, then it will go away. That is spiritual bypassing. Or but in the 5D, we're all just one human race. Okay, yes, scientifically agreed. Totally, I feel you. But like, realistically, in our systems and structures, that is not reflected. We can create that and we can call it in, but it's going to take recognition and action. We're not going to like manifest our way out of oppression. So that's my tangent on decolonizing in the sacred earth medicine space.
Yeah, and like, even in that bypassing, like, you don't heal your trauma by just being your personal trauma by being like, oh, but I, like, as a spirit, I am whole. It's like, no, that's not like that might help hold the space for you to move through the hard stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, and then also, like, I'm sure you've run into like the soul lives people who are like, oh, well, I can serve ayahuasca after one ceremony because I visited a past life, and in that life I was a Shipibo shaman or a Shipibo medicine person. And you're like, okay, sure, that could be true. Again, though, in this current iteration, that's not the body you're in, that's not the context you live in, that's not the training you have. Unless in that one ceremony you also remembered the 20 years of sitting with the medicine that would have occurred for any medicine person to be in that community. And for me, the other very weird like cognitive dissonance in those statements is, okay, if in a past soul life you were a Shipibo medicine person, shouldn't you be going extra hard for the Shipibo lineage and community then to protect that knowledge and those communities and that plant, as opposed to using a soul life as a justification for why you are practicing out of integrity now. So soul life's not my favorite. A beautiful concept, but just applied irresponsibly.
Right. Oh, love that. Fortunately, I have seen it, but fortunately, that doesn't seem to run too much to the people I'm around, so I'm grateful. But like, yeah, I'm glad you've named that, and I think, I'm already like, we're gonna have you back on the show because there's so much. I can't believe it's already been 45 minutes, and I definitely want to talk about being naked in nature because that is like one of the greatest joys in life. So tell me about your journey. Is there, first of all, before we kind of shift away, is there anything else? Because I know we got like, so we could talk about so much. Is there anything else that you're like, with what we've covered, that you're like, okay, I just want to wrap it up with this bow here, or any little dot or detail you want to add before we shift?
Yeah, I feel like this. Yeah, one piece, and then I'm all about the nakedness. I see a lot of people really, really eager to step into this work, to have their first early journeys with the medicine, and that eagerness overshadows their discernment. And that frequently, many of us are coming to these medicines to heal really deep-seated trauma that we may not even understand how it's impacting our perspective or our understanding of our attachments, and end up choosing to sit with folks who don't have our best interest at heart and who may not be aligned or prepared to support what the medicine wants to draw forward. So I just really encourage folks to not rush this just because it sounds trendy and exciting and cool and healing and like some magic pill, because it's very much not. It's very much like a lot of really deep work that you need to be committed to on a regular basis. And yeah, to just, trust your gut and your intuition. If a situation feels off, to honor yourself and to honor these medicines as well by not sitting with folks who are not, actively participating in their own decolonization process and in all of our collective liberation.
Love that. And there's something else I think is really, I'm like, okay, I can't believe I almost didn't talk about this. So integration, huge part of the journey. And, like you mentioned, people might think this is some like magic pill, and it's not. And like my experience with psychedelics has been, it cracked my life open and my mind open. It took me like fucking 10 years to integrate some shit or more, like really sent me on a spiral. So what is integration in your own words, and how do you have been holding spaces for people not just to sit with y'all, but who maybe came from another experience and are looking for integration. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question too. So integration for us is, and for me has been about taking my downloads, my insights from the medicine, and turning it into daily action, daily embodied practice. And at the Ancestral Project, we take a sort of five perspective approach. We call it the 5 circles of self, which is your physical, mental, and spiritual health. That's like what's happening internally. And then the way that we turn this into collective action is by focusing on our communal and collective health and the health of our environment. And so really just checking in those 5 areas of life on a regular basis and seeing how you're in balance with those different pieces and parts, and taking small action to release whatever habits, beliefs, narratives, ideas, people, or places that no longer serve you, that you're really excited to let go of. And then thinking about what you're making space for, what habits, behaviors, ideas, narratives, people, and places you're allowing into your life. And doing that from the perspective of like building the life and the world that you really want to see. And so in our integration circles, which are peer-led, we really just give space for people to come and process their journeys, to be able to talk about it. A lot of people, especially BIPOC folks who are exploring a relationship with the medicine, do not have a community in which they can talk about it safely. And so we have that container. And it's really just built into this beautiful community that kind of like self-supports. It's a very peer-led. Dre in there, we open the space, we open with that prayer. We set group agreements around how we communicate in the space, what types of things are appropriate to share or to ask, just from a safety perspective. And then we kind of let it flow. And it always happens that like someone comes in, has something to share, somebody has that resonates, somebody else has a question, and then it just goes. And it's been a really beautiful space to see grow. But yeah, integration, it's you have to have space for that after your journey, and it's an ongoing process. I mean, I'm integrating experiences that I had 10 years ago when I didn't know anything about integration and was just like hopping from one experience to the next.
Would you be willing to share maybe what was sort of an awareness that came through or clarity that came through for you in a journey, and then how did that integrate into your life?
Ooh. Oh yeah, okay. I was journeying at home by myself semi-recently. I do not highly recommend that for folks who have not sat before. I'm 10, 12 years into psychedelic journeying, and in year 9 started to sit for myself. So this is that, just putting that big caveat. But I was in this room, this is the room I journey in, and I'd had a decent amount of mushrooms. I'm definitely I'm not like a crazy high doser. There are people who do like 20-gram journeys. I'm not there yet, but it was a good serving of medicine. And I was laying there and it sounded like dial-up. Like in my brain, it was like, I was like, and it was like increasing. I was like, oh, this is, we're about to be in. And this was like within the first hour. So I was like, this is about to be a really long 4 or 5 hours. And then I heard this voice, and the medicine was like, we cannot connect through the judgment. Like, we're trying to connect, and we can't connect through the judgment and the shame. And I was like, dang. And then it stopped. And then I was in the journey. So judgment and shame blocks my connection. And how do I integrate that? Great question. So one of the practices that I love that we give to other people is every time you find yourself criticizing or complaining about yourself, that you have to stop and give yourself 3 compliments. And then if your first thought is, oh, that's stupid, then you have to give yourself 3 more until you just exist in this space of like celebrating yourself. So that's like one little one. I also have a mirror behind me on my altar. So I really am a fan of mirror work. I'm a fan of dance and movement. And then I know we were going to get into this conversation about nudism, but I feel like that's also been a piece of my integration journey, because years ago when I was in traditional psychotherapy, I received a diagnosis of generalized anxiety and body dysmorphia. So for me, the fact that I get naked now in public places is wild, because I used to struggle to like get naked and look at myself in a mirror. So I try to this house that I moved into has an immense amount of mirrors in it. Like, it just came with like walls of mirrors. So I had to get very comfortable. I'll show you. Like, literally. That's one room. The exact same thing is also in the bedroom. And then I have this mirror here. So a lot of opportunity to look at myself. And I really enjoy that now. And I find that when I don't, and then I do come back to a mirror, I can sense this like slight disconnection that I've had with myself because I'm not seeing myself. Like I'm not bearing witness to myself. I'm also a really big fan as of late of the Enneagram, like archetype mapping system, in which I'm a 9. In the American system, that's the peacemaker or mediator. But the American system is like, we turned it into like a positive coaching tool. In the original system, a 9 is the sloth, and it's the spiritually lazy, and which I find super comical, given what I do now. But it absolutely aligns. And the number one, like, trope or I don't want to say flaw, but like the challenge of being a 9 is self-forgetting, that you constantly will put others before yourself. You will put, for a long time, I put the ancestor ahead of, I put the collective in front of myself. I forgot that my collective liberation is tied up in my individual liberation. So yeah, those are some of my tools. And then I also just have a regular, like, I meditate. I have a regular relationship with a couple of different medicines, including tobacco, including sage, including mushrooms and cacao. I try to regularly clean my space out energetically, clean myself off energetically with smoke or with water. And I do CCP every day. Cleanse, center, and protect. So I clean myself off, clean my space out, I center myself, and then I protect myself. So that's, whether that's like in the way I adorn myself. I feel I'm always protected because I have a lot of like intentional tattoos and symbology on my body. And I try to carry things with me on a regular basis. And then also the low-hanging fruit, like I take deep breaths, I drink a gallon of water a day, I try to nourish myself with good food. I try to do soft and rigorous movement. So yeah, all of those pieces. But for me, the big integration is like taking care of myself.
Thank you for that. And, you know, you said it's easier for you to forget yourself. And I've been thinking about this lately, too, of how we're taught to serve and to not be selfish. But for some folks for whom their trauma led them to have to people please or, you know, mediate in order to have their needs met, barely get whatever scraps of their needs met they could have, that it's not selfish to have your needs met. And that's a whole different flip side to this don't be selfish story. And so like, yeah,
1,000%. When actually it's been really interesting. Dre, my co-founder, is a 2 on the Enneagram, which is pride. And so for him, a lot of the messaging that I think increased my self-forgetting as we started the Ancestor Project was this messaging around the humility that's needed to be in this work and to be of service, and that it's not, I'm not doing anything. It's the ancestors are moving. I'm not making the choices. I didn't come up with the ideas. It's the ancestors. So it's like a constantly putting it outside of yourself, which just made it easier for me to fall back into the self-forgetting. And so since we now have this tool, like we frame that in different ways for each of us, because for him as a prideful person with a larger, like character, it's helpful to be reminded of the genius moves through me. It is not me. And, you know, to be very humble and to bow to the beings and the powers that be, which I need to do as well after I've taken care of myself. Like I can't do that. I can't listen to the genius that flows through all things and be open to that if I haven't taken care of myself, because I'm not in a state in which I can even receive that.
I feel like it's a whole nother podcast we need to talk, like, you know, and I feel like that's kind of part of why, you spoke earlier about people kind of rushing into these experiences and ending up with people who aren't really able to hold that space for them. They don't really know how to discern. And I think that comes from so much of that wounding and all this mixed messaging and all these little catchy little quotes we see on Instagram and think like, okay, I have to contort myself to fit into don't be selfish, or contort myself into do this to heal my trauma or whatever. And I love Instagram, don't get me wrong, I'm all about it, but it's just part of this weird, this unpacking that we're doing as a collective and as individuals. And thank you for sharing your experience and being able to speak to that.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about being naked in nature. I think we can talk about being naked in nature now. And you connected that to having this diagnosis of body dysmorphia. And how did you go from body dysmorphia to let's find the places in the world that are the best for people to just be naked in nature and it's not weird?
Yeah. A lot of love, I think. I'll get real mushy about my husband. Yeah, it was really beautiful to have someone else reflect that to me and also express desire to experience that together. He was already a super nudist. When we met, he was living in a house with 3 roommates and with a married couple who was poly and had a girlfriend. So when he was like, oh, I want to be naked in the house, they were like, okay, whatever. So he existed all of the time. I would go to hang out, or we would be going to dinner and I would go to the house to meet him before we walked to dinner, and he would just be completely naked in the kitchen with all the other people in the house. So watching that, witnessing how carefree he was about it was really liberating. And then I guess our first naked trip was before my first Kambo ceremony. So yeah, I think also hilariously, I feel like the people pleasing served me a little bit in this scenario, in that I really liked this dude. He liked to be naked. He asked me if I wanted, and he asked me, I really appreciate that. We met a couple recently when we were on our last naked trip. And she was like, oh yeah, he just took me to a naked beach and didn't tell me. And I was like, that's fucked up and non-consensual. She was like, yeah, it wasn't great. And there's different types of couples and different types of people in the nudist world, I would say. They were definitely leaning more towards the lifestyle side, which is the swinger side. And we lean more towards the naturalism, which is just existing as a being as you came into this earth, in the earth as it is. So yeah, he asked me if I wanted to go to the naked beach for my birthday. And I've just gotten way better at saying yes. When things show up, and not in a self-betraying way, but when opportunities that are outside of my comfort zone show up, I've gotten better at saying yes, which is how I said yes to Kambo. So it was a couple months after saying yes to Kambo, but I hadn't sat yet. So I was like, all right, let's do this. And it was great. I love to swim. I love the ocean. Being naked in the ocean is amazing. Amazing. I also was I grew up in a sort of naked household. My mom would walk around naked and I took baths with my dad. That was super normal. And I was naked a lot, as babies are. And so, yeah. And again, I think I said this earlier, I'm into dissenting opinions. I'm into saying F you to authority. So nakedness felt a little subversive as well, probably. So I like that aspect. For me, the more recent test of it has been that I have had a couple of naked experiences by myself. And I think that's been really important as well, because it was something that very much was happening within partnership. And while that was supportive and important to get me to a certain place, I think I also need to check in with myself to make sure that it is something that I do genuinely love to do. So the other day I was my husband wasn't home and I was just I want to be naked right now. And I texted him. I was like, I'm just being naked in the house, checking in with myself, making sure I like this. He's like, great. So yeah, it's been it's just been a beautiful exploration. There's been phases of it for me, from like partial nudism to like full nudism. And but yeah, for my birthday last year, for my 30th birthday, we went with 4 of our couple friends to a campsite, and we're just like naked for the weekend, and everyone was like, this was amazing. So we organized one in the summer of 2020. We did a group camping trip, so that's like part of what we do with nudism as well, is that like we bring other people into it. And I see a lot of overlap in that work and in the psychedelic work, that like you really have to create and maintain a really safe container. You have to have really clear agreements within the collective that is present around what is going to transpire and how it is safe to interact with each other and support each other in that space. It did, as we're talking about this, I hadn't had a Kambo ceremony yet, but my husband and I had a really challenging mushroom journey together, in which we like very much saw each other, I think, like all the way. Not for the first time. We've like been very, I think, bearing witness to each other from the beginning, but yeah, it just really amplified our like seeing of each other. So at that point, I felt so safe and like complete trust in him. Also, he's a 6'7" Black man, so I was like, nobody's about to fuck with me while I'm naked. So, all right, let's do this. If we're gonna do it in life, we're gonna do it now. So that's how that transpired, and yeah, now I'm all about it. I love it, and I want more people to experience it. And it is like an extension of the decolonization, right? Because again, if we look at our ancestry, not so much the European lineages, because like it was cold, so fine, but like in Africa, present day Africa, in present day Central South America, in present day Southeastern Asia, Australia, New Zealand, like we were naked. And clothing came in as a form of control and a form of social marker from the colonizer, right? It became a form of respectability politics that you had to like put on pants to be able to get a job in the whatever, or sit at X table of power. So I'm also into like challenging what we see as acceptable and professional and all of that. So yeah, if I could show up to a board raid half naked, I might do it. Maybe someday.
I will not be shocked when that happens. I'll be like, yep, you called it. I love that. And thanks for sharing that journey. It's I do want to share a little bit about mine too here, just because I haven't really talked about being naked in nature on the show, and maybe this can inspire someone to dip their toes in. But like I love the feeling of the wind on my parts and like being in the water and just like feel like it really does feel different to not have a bathing suit top on or a bathing suit bottom on. It's like it's so different and beautiful feeling.
Yes, there's no separation between you and the elements. It's like such a good reminder that we are of the earth, because you blend. I had a cool mushroom journey once where I was like, I'm just gonna let myself get consumed by the earth. I feel like I have some weird things about like insects and stuff. So I just like got naked and laid in a field and just kind of let that happen. And it was great. And when we went camping, I'm gonna blow up Dre's spot just a little bit, but I think it'll be fine. When we met, he could not separate the idea of nudism and sexuality. I was like, they can be separate things. They can definitely be separate things. We're all so conditioned that they can't. So I was like, I get it, but they totally can be separate. And it took, again, this is the arc with Dre. I'd be like 2 years. I'd be like, you should do a men's circle. And he's like, I don't separate. He's like organizing a men's circle now. I'm like, we should do BIPOC circles. He's like, I don't separate. Organizing BIPOC ceremonies. But yeah, it was like nudism. He was like, nah. And then he came on my birthday camping trip, and he was like, I think there's parts of my body that have never seen the sun. And I was like, yeah, yes, it happens, like if you really think about it, for a lot of us. Since you're a baby, at least, there's, parts of your body that don't see the sun. So I love sharing that with other people as well.
Definitely. Also, if y'all going out there, put sunscreen on your parts. You don't want a dick burn.
Oh my goodness. Oh, the boobie burn when your titties have never seen the sun before and that skin is so thin and it is so pale. Oh yeah. Man.
Titrate. Little bit at a time.
Your boobs can peel. I will tell you from.
Oh, ouch. Ouch. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Still worth it though. Still worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like that, like you spoke to, that kind of like rebel, like the liberation, the choice to be or not to be naked. Not that you have to, but even just to have the choice. Like that's. Oh man. Yes. Well, this was so beautiful. And is there anything else you want to say before we share what you offer and where people can find you?
No, I think this is great. This is super energizing. Thank you. I'm excited that we're all having more of these conversations and approaching them with nuance also. So yeah, I appreciate having that conversation around internalized policing and decolonization, all of that.
Totally. Thank you for sharing and just being, I know it can be showing up and speaking these things can be difficult or challenging because of the policing. So thank you for just showing up and naming it and just being willing to stand there in your truths. And I imagine that you'll be back on the show talking about some constructs. And I think we need to get Shauna in on this because constructs are her middle name.
I'm about it. I'm here for it.
Yeah. So what do you offer and where can people find you?
Yeah. So people can find the Ancestor Project at theancestorproject.com, at the Ancestor Project on social. My personal Instagram handle is created by .charlotte. And yeah, we offer online through the Ancestor Project, online and in-person opportunities for radical transformation and collective liberation. So we have monthly master classes, training programs, and then we have ceremonies as well. So you can come sit with us one-on-one or join in a group, and integration circles for BIPOC folks. And we'll be dropping our first international retreat in the next month. So excited to finally get to more openly talk about the other medicines that we serve and invite our community into those spaces. So yeah, it would be beautiful for anyone to come and join us. And come do some radical shifting.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing. And of course, y'all, those links are in the show notes as always. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for bringing your magic and sharing it with us today on the show. Can't wait to talk again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was an honor.
All the roads are windy.
Listen to over 200 free EarthSpeak podcast episodes on your favorite podcast app and visit earthspeak.love to learn about our collective community and workshops.